Good morning. We are so glad that you have joined us today. I'm Martha Sinkula, your service leader, and I welcome you to the Umpqua Unitarian Universalist congregation. And as I look out in the sanctuary, I still really miss seeing everyone. As more and more of us become fully vaccinated, we can look forward ahead to opening our congregation. In the meantime, take a moment to check in with each other. Our speaker this week is Reverend Dennis Reynolds, and he will be available for an after-sermon Zoom discussion. We meet every Sunday with check-in that begins at 11:15, and our conversation begins at 11:30. And if you miss the after-service discussion, they're recorded, just like our services, so you can view them anytime on YouTube. Services are generally uploaded on Saturday nights. And in addition to services and discussions, we also have meditations and interviews. There's a lot to check out. We want to thank Michael Wheeler and Lucy Swangham for their work on producing these very fine videos every week. Thank you, folks. Our chalice lighting words this morning are by Betsy Darr. May the light of this chalice give light and warmth to our community when we are joyful and when we are in despair.
And may we feel the warmth spread from our circle to wider and wider circles until all know they belong to one circle of life.
Our call to worship this morning and opening words are by Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. We are one, after all, you and I. Together we suffer. Together we exist. And forever we'll recreate each other.
I invite you now into a time of shared contemplation and meditation. Sit in a way that's comfortable for you. It's recommended that you look at a straight back and a soft front to allow the breath to flow more readily in and out. As share some words, we'll have a time of shared silence and then followed by some music. The words are from the Reverend Amy Carol Webb. We meet in the spaces between us. Stillness, music, heard or unheard. The apparent void teeming with the you and the I that overlap in this one sacred living moment. We meet in the spaces between us.
Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshipper, lover of leaving, ours is no caravan of despair. Come yet again, come, 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 whoever you are, condemn, worshipper, whoever you're leaving, ours is no caravan of disbelieving, ours is no caravan of despair. Come yet again, whoever you are, condemn, worshipper, whoever you're leaving, ours is no caravan of disbelieving. Come yet again, come.
Our reading are the lyrics from West Side Story by Stephen Sondheim. There's a place for us, somewhere, a place for us. Peace and quiet and open air wait for us somewhere. There's a time for us, someday a time for us. Time together, with time to spare, time to learn, time to care. Someday, somewhere, we'll find a new way of living. We'll find a way of forgiving. Somewhere. There's a place for us, a time and a place for us. Hold my hand, and we're halfway there. Hold my hand and I'll take you there. Somehow, someday, somewhere. Our speaker today is Reverend Dennis Reynolds, who came to the ministry after a 30-year career as a preschool teacher and administrator at the University of Oregon. He has since retired to Eugene after serving several churches in Oregon, Washington State, and also as a hospital chaplain. He has been an activist locally and globally, and he believes the most powerful sermons are often those written with a religious text in one hand and a current news source in the other. He enjoys lifelong learning and the practice of crafting sermons, and our congregation enjoys his wisdom and wit and his ability to share his authentic self with us. Dennis?
Someday, somewhere. Many of us remember the lyrics of that iconic song from the musical hit West Side Story. But I suspect few remember there was a change made between the Broadway in the Hollywood versions. On Broadway, the song was sung by a single off-stage voice as accompaniment to a dance number that came to be known as the Somewhere Ballet. It was sung as part of an ensemble portion of the production. It was a song for all. In Hollywood, as Hollywood often does, it was transformed into a duet with the two ill-fated lovers, Tony and Maria, singing to each other. It became a song of romantic love and longing, instead of a song about a more collective, shared sense of longing, and a different manifestation, a broader meaning of that troubling English word, love. The change is significant because the Broadway version is a song for all of us, a message of possibility for a broad audience and an expression of a longing we all feel. The story within West Side Story was about so much more than a romance. The longing expressed through those lyrics is a song, and it is as strong now as it was when the play first opened back in 1957. Over the past 15 months, most of us have longed to be in a different place and in a different time. Yet we know there's a time for us, someday a time for us, time together with time to spare, time to learn, time to care, someday, when the COVID restrictions are no longer needed and we can safely be in the same place at the same time together. Someday we might actually be able to hold each other's hands and even offer a hug to a consenting and equally longing friend. Someday we can hold hands because we're no longer fearful of another's touch, and we can look into each other's eyes and be reminded of our shared humanity, rather than being focused on roles and labels and categorizations that too often separate us. There'll be time to learn, time to care, someday, somewhere. Someday and somewhere when the heat of political divisiveness might have cooled a bit. We'll find a new way of living. We'll find a way of forgiving. Someday, somewhere. The storyline offered in West Side Story and in Shakespeare's much earlier play, Romeo and Juliet, on which it is based, each gift us with a tale that offers a message of truth for any time, including for our time. In both versions of the story, two beautiful young lovers are tragically separated by the divisiveness in their communities. In ancient Verona of Romeo and Juliet, it's the feuding between the two families, the Capulets and the Montagues. Being of different, nearly warring clans, the starry-eyed lovers Juliet and her Romeo cannot be openly together and must strive in secrecy and stealth to share their love. But it seems that for the playwright and for the Elizabethan audience of that time that first witnessed the play, there may have been more going on than simply a love story. Some scholars suggest that Romeo and Juliet was a veiled warning to Queen Elizabeth of the dangers and evils of continuing the persecution of Catholic citizens. In those times, the Church of England had become the royal religion and thus the prescribed religion of the land. In Elizabethan England, it was religious clans that were feuding. Official repression did not squash divisiveness, and coming together became an even more remote possibility. Shakespeare's beautiful story was about much more than a romance. In Leonard Bernstein and Stephen Sondheim's late 1950s musical remake, divisiveness takes on a racial dimension, as the warring gangs are the White Jets and the Puerto Rican Sharks. It becomes the classes, the clans in deep and simmering conflict are racially divided. Remember that 1957 was the times when the civil rights movement in the United States was just heating up. The Montgomery boycott had ended in 1956 when the Supreme Court ruled that such discrimination in transportation was unconstitutional. In early 1956, black churches and the lives of prominent black leaders were bombed. This reality was certainly on the playwrights' minds. It's reported that the original concept that they had come up with for setting Romeo and Juliet to music would be a story titled East Side Story, where the two families were staunchly Christian and conservatively Jewish. Through the magic of Google, I came across references to a fascinating book titled The Musical: Race, Gender, and Performance by Susan Smith. Smith opines that this musical presents highly amplified, ritualized enactments of racial and gender roles. The film contains racist hostilities between cultures and a study of the patriarchal oppression of women within the individual cultures. The performance of race and gender within this film are closely tied. Smith cites the white girl, Anybody, and the young Puerto Rican, Anita, as two strong women being within their own cultures, each attempting to resist oppression in their own ways. She writes, "There is no single American cultural product that haunts Puerto Rican discourse more than West Side Story. Hollywood promoted a negative stereotype of Puerto Rican identity through the film. The use of white actors to portray the Puerto Rican leads, the use of brownface and supposed Puerto Rican on the supposed Puerto Rican George Chakiris, the atrocious accents of Chakiris and Natalie Wood, and the criminal nature of the Puerto Rican gangs all perpetuated this stereotype. In the case of Maria," she continues, "casting Natalie Wood not only brought star power to the film, but allowed the audience to safely indulge in an interracial relationship with the knowledge that Maria was, in reality, a white woman." This was changed in a 2010 revival where the Jets sang in Spanish and the Puerto Ricans were really Puerto Ricans. And back to the book, though, in the original version, Smith contends that the Puerto Rican actress Rita Moreno, through her powerful performance, paves the way to consider Puerto Rican American identity as a distinct social and cultural formation. And she earned that Oscar she was awarded. A writer who uses the nom de plume Mpolo wrote in the blog and internet forum Daily Cost that both the original Broadway stage production and the film version of West Side Story were created during much more hopeful, exuberant, and optimistic times, when so much more seemed possible, despite much higher crime rates and racial, ethnic, and religious and socioeconomic tensions and hostilities here in the United States. West Side Story, he says, sends a message that's really a double-edged sword, but it's a very good message nonetheless. West Side Story proves that the consequences of racial, ethnic, cultural hatred, gang violence, gratuitous violence in general, and general arrogance and hubris, and being constantly puffed up with pride, can be, and often are, quite deleterious not only to the victims, but to the perpetuators alike. Mapallo asserts that there is a more hopeful message in West Side Story as well. Intergroup racial conciliation and unity is difficult and almost as impossible as it seems, as it often seems, can still be possible. He continues, "Hey, I know that in real life, street gangs don't go dancing through the streets on their way to the Rumble, and that people don't ordinarily fall in love at first sight. If, however, in real life people do fall in love at first sight, a lasting love based on mutual trust, commitment, and devotion takes time to grow and develop into something that's really substantial." West Side Story, he says, I think is still very popular because even today it's still quite relevant. People throughout the United States and throughout the world generally still fight with each other, and wars still happen. Racism, racial and ethnic tensions, and urban gang warfare still abound, although today it's generally with guns rather than fisticuffs, and switchblade knives. People still cross the racial, ethnic, color, religion divides to date, fall in love, and even marry and raise families. In the midst of times of conflict, as he tells us, intergroup reconciliation and unity, as difficult and almost as impossible as it often is, can still be possible. Somehow, somewhere. In our times, when many families and too many friendships have been torn apart by divisiveness, be it about partisan politics or different ideas about how to confront a pandemic, we know in our hearts that intergroup reconciliation and unity, as difficult and almost as impossible as it often is, can still be possible. It is difficult, and it is possible. Love makes it possible. Not the romantic love between individuals, but that deeper love for humanity that feeds and a longing we all feel to let go of judgment and the divisive practices of classifying people who look and believe differently as other or as rival. That kind of loving sometimes is very difficult. I know that in my own life, though I strive to be less judgmental, I all too often miss the mark. To miss the mark, by the way, is one of the definitions of the word sin. It seems that the Greek word from which sin derived is a word taken from archery. To miss the mark is to miss the bullseye, even when one attempts to point in the right direction. I all too often miss the mark, though I seek to point in the right direction. Just a couple of weeks ago, I missed the mark big time in my judgment about another person. As some of you know, early in the pandemic, my wife Suzanne and I moved into our new house that we had had built for us. It was certainly well planned. One might say planned to perfection. We couldn't find a house in our preferred neighborhood, but we found the perfect lot. The house plans were from an architect friend we know on Whidbey Island named Ross Chapin. Ross's plan was perfect for us. Yet we worked with a local Eugene architect to modify it some to make it even more perfect. We also, in the process of building, changed window sizes and made other changes to make it truly perfect. The house is on a small rise, set back a bit, and accessed by walking up a small gravel path. The path we soon discovered was not perfect. On occasion, some of our friends and we too slipped. No one fell, but we realized a gravel pathway was not consistent with our intention to age in place in this house. So we planned for a sidewalk and a small concrete patio by the front porch. Then the house would be perfect. We called in a concrete contractor to do the work, and we scheduled them to get the work completed before summertime visitors would arrive. Perfect. On Wednesday, 2 weeks ago, the crew came to do the hand excavating to put in the forms. The workers arrived in 2 different vehicles, one a small SUV and the other a big 4x4 pickup truck. I noted as it loudly roared into the driveway, it was not, after all, really a pickup truck, but had been converted into a contractor's flatbed. Waving off the back of this very large truck was a brightly colored flag. Suzanne and I cringed a bit. We had seen flags waving on trucks like that one now roaring into our driveway, roaring through the streets of many cities, proclaiming their strong support for a former presidential candidate, former president, and his views. Those views are very different than our own. It seemed that an expression of our country's divisiveness had just pulled into the driveway of our perfect retreat. We reluctantly accepted the fact that the flag that was now waving in front of our perfect house likely offered a very different message than the signs in our yard, one of which reads, "It's time for a fossil-free Eugene," and the other which proclaims, "In this house, we believe Black lives matter. Women's rights are human rights. No human is legal. Science is real. Love is love. No matter your faith or ability, kindness is kindness." By the way, we had a similar sign in front of our UU Fellowship on Whidbey Island, where I previously served. Suzanne and I decided it would be best if we did not get into any deep conversations, especially about politics, with the laborers on the contractor's crew. Later in the day, Suzanne went out for a dental appointment. Shortly after leaving, she stopped to text me about something she had discovered when she went out to the car. It seems the flag flying on that truck was not what we expected. It was a world peace flag. It had brightly colored stripes on both sides, and in the center was an image of a dove overlaying a globe. The words "world peace" were in the background. Such a message is certainly consistent with our beliefs. We had clearly misjudged the individual, for both that young man who I discovered is named Aaron, and we had a shared hope, a shared longing for more peace and a more peaceful and perfect world. I had erroneously cast him as other. Though I do try not to do that with others, with anyone. Most mornings, as part of our regular meditation, Suzanne and I recite a prayer that calls for one to cultivate a boundless goodwill toward the entire world, uncramped, free from ill will or enmity. I try to heed the call of our first Unitarian Universalist principle to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. In my judgment about Aaron, I had clearly missed the mark. My attitude was far from perfect. Even if our views were different, he is worthy of my respect, not just my condescending silence. That day, my hasty judgment had unnecessarily distanced me from another person. It seems this work of living into our most treasured values is the work of a lifetime, and I am gifted with many friggin' growth opportunities. Aaron and his flag flying had gifted me with an important reminder and a lesson about openness and loving that it seems I need to learn and relearn again and again and again. The writer, C. Joybell C., urges us to open your mind to the world in the many different ways that can be found in it before making hasty judgments of others. After all, the very same thing that you judge from where you are may very well be something totally different in meaning on the other side of the world. The problem with making hasty judgments is that it will emphasize your ignorance at the end of the day. That day, I was reminded that Aaron and I shared the hope that someday, somehow, we'll find a new way of living. We'll find a way of forgiving. He and I both hope and pray that peace and quiet and open air wait for us somewhere. Our faith tradition is one that embraces deed rather than creed, that calls us towards actions that are grounded in love. When we honestly and without judgment embrace our longings and express them, be it words of a love song or in a yard sign or a flag, we move one step closer to making that someday, today. May it be so.
Our closing words for benediction this morning are by Hosea Ballou, who is often considered the father of universalism of our faith. If we agree in love, there's no disagreement that can do us injury. But if we do not, no other agreement can do us any good. Let us endeavor to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bonds of peace. Shalom and blessed be.